right, you should be looking at code right now. Give me a thumbs up if you are. Okay, good. Sweet. So I'm just gonna sit here and wait for you all to tell me when to start. Sorry about the shaky start here.
No, you're all good to go.
Oh, okay, cool. It's kind of weird to not have a microphone in my face, actually. It's a little refreshing. So I'm going to put your video over here. So if I'm looking over here, I'm actually looking at you, even though it doesn't look like I'm looking at you. Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you for bearing with me on this. So today I just thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about testing. It was like on Twitter, Eric was let's see, yeah, I don't know. So yeah, it was Renee. I'm looking at the tweet now. Wanted a React testing library workshop, and I saw that and said, hey, I could, or not a workshop, but a talk, I guess, and I can do that. So that's why we're here to talk a little bit about React testing library, testing in general, and I mostly want to talk about why I think React testing library is so foundationally impactful, and why people who try it really, really like it a lot. And I was at a meetup last night, and I had everybody raise their hands who'd ever even tried React testing library before, and it was maybe like 33%, like a third of the people there tried it. And I asked, of those people who tried it, how many of them prefer it over Enzyme? And everybody preferred it over Enzyme. So anybody who tries it really like it resonates really well with them. And so I thought I'd talk about a little bit about why I think that is, and like the guiding principle behind React testing library, and why it's so great. So, or at least why I think it's so great. So the biggest thing around testing that I think we sometimes miss is we forget to take a step back about automated testing and think, why do we really even care about testing? And it comes down to being confident that your code is working the way that you want it to, the way that you intended the first time you wrote it. And so like if it's not going to do that, then like your customers aren't going to pay you, whatever. And so your tests are there to make sure that as you make changes to your code base, things will continue to work, and so you don't have regressions. When you refactor your code, your code continues to work the way that it was intended, and your test should catch you when you make mistakes, or at least tell you, hey, you didn't think about this one thing. Either the test is broken and we need to adjust the test to account for this new use case, or this like business requirements change, or your implementation is broken and you need to fix the test. And if it's not doing those things, then the test is just noise and busy work, not useful. So how do tests get into this situation where they aren't useful? And my argument is that it's when you're testing implementation details, how your component is implemented. And so that's what I'm going to show you, what testing implementation details looks like, and how why that actually is a problem, given a practical example. And then how React testing library not only encourages you to avoid testing implementation details, but also makes it actually pretty hard to do the wrong thing. And this comes down to the pit of success. So it's much easier to do the right thing, and it's hard to do the wrong thing. Whereas with previous testing tools, that was kind of flipped on its head a little bit. So for this example, let me bump this up a little bit. You probably can't see it very well. So let's get back to that. I just refreshed and that was a mistake. Yeah, maybe you may have thought that this was VS Code, but no, this is Code Sandbox. Ha! Code Sandbox is so cool. But yeah, so here's what we have is a accordion. So I can click on each one of these and it opens the other, right? And closes the previous. So that's a pretty typical accordion UI. We have these hats and footwear. We pass that as items to our accordion, and then it just renders those things out. So pretty cool. Lots of us have built accordions before. So what is so foundational about this? Not a whole lot, but what we're going to look at is actually the test. So if I go to the enzyme example, that's where we're going to start. And I'm not necessarily like knocking on enzyme in particular. It's just like literally the only other well-known React testing or library for testing React components. And so that's why we're doing it this way. But yeah, so if I were to test this with enzyme, this is like kind of the typical, here's how you test things with enzyme kind of thing. Or actually, we don't want we want the accordion, just so we can reference that. So let's look at how this is built first. It has some state, and we're using classes because enzyme can't really do hooks yet, which is sad. So we're going to use classes. Yeah, so we've got this open index of 0. We have this method set open index to change the open index, and then we render out this UI based off of that state and the items that we get. And when I click on a button, it updates the open index so we know which one to actually render. Cool, right? And then this accordion contents that actually just renders the thing in a div. It's nothing too special. So if I were to test this using enzyme, here are 2 test cases. I want my, anytime I set the open index, I want that state to change, right? That's the way that we typically think about things with enzyme. And so it should change the open index property. And then if I have the items that I'm passing in through here, then it should render the accordion contents with each of the item contents. So it should render 1 accordion contents for the contents that we are given. So the way that this is going to be implemented is I'm going to make a wrapper. That's the enzyme wrapper concept, and we're going to mount this. We could shallow render it, but I don't like shallow rendering. It's so bad, and we're not going to get into it, but I have this blog post why I never use shallow rendering. Never do it. It is always a bad idea. Always. I don't have any opinions about that at all. Just kidding. I have very strong opinions about that. Okay, so we're going to render our accordion. It takes some items, so I'll say items. But for this particular test, we actually don't care what those items are, so we'll just pass an empty array. And now we need to access the state so we can verify that the open index starts out as 0. So I'm going to expect wrapper.state open index. That's going to get me my open index state, and I expect that to be 0 to get it started. So sweet, we're passing that. And then I want to call the set open index so that I update that open index. So we'll say wrapper instance, you get that the instance of our component. We'll set the open index to 1, and now I can expect this to be 1. And sweet. And the way that you know whether a test is actually useful is if you can actually break it. So what I'm going to do here is I'll say open index to 4, and my test should break. So sweet. We're testing what we think we're testing, which is good. So we'll set the open index to the open index that's provided, and our test is passing. Very good. Okay, so that's our first test, and let's go ahead and we'll write this second test, and then we'll talk about why these are problematic. So I'm going to just we need some items for this second test. I'm going to go to the index here, and I'm just going to copy these. Actually, I'll just copy all this stuff. And we'll paste that right here, and then we'll mount the accordion with those items, and that's going to get me back my wrapper. And with that wrapper now, I want to verify that the accordion contents is being rendered with the item contents, and by default it's going to expand the first one. So the contents should be the hats.contents, right? So let's go ahead and the first thing we want is to find the accordion contents wrapper. So we'll say accordion contents wrapper equals wrapper.find. And how do we find that accordion contents component? Well, there's a really easy way to do this in Enzyme, and that is I just copy the display name of that particular component, and now I get the accordion contents wrapper. So now from there I can expect the accordion contents wrapper.props, so the props that it was passed, .children to be hats.contents. And I've got that working now too. So if I swap this up and I'm like broken, then I can break my test. Okay, good. So this is actually what I expect it to be. We're testing what we think we're testing. Okay, so that's actually like a pretty, if you read through the docs and you do what the enzyme documentation says and what you read in the issues when people ask questions about how to test stuff like this is a pretty typical setup for how you test with enzyme. They provide you all these utilities for accessing the state and calling methods on the instance, looking for components by their display name, so on and so forth. This is like pretty straightforward stuff here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about why these are really problematic and how these are actually testing implementation details, and more particularly, why testing implementation details in this way is going to lead to problems. And the two main problems with testing implementation details is that you wind up with false negatives when you're refactoring. So the tests fail when they're not supposed to because you're just refactoring. The behavior is the same. That's all that matters, is that like the behavior doesn't change. And then false positives when you actually broke something. So the tests say that they're passing, but it actually fails. So we'll take a look at the false negatives first. So I'm going to actually change the way that we're going to implement this. Let's imagine that somebody comes along and says, hey, I want to be able to open both of these at the same time. So now instead of an open index, just one open index, we actually can have multiple open indexes. And so you say, okay, I'm going to start out by making this accordion capable of having multiple indexes. So that's going to require, and here I just want a little bit more space. So we'll leave that as it is. We'll pull this test over here too. Because, well, actually, no, we'll just have the accordion open. Okay, so for this, I'm going to say I need open indexes, and that will just be an array of my open indexes. And then instead of set open index, it's set open indexes, or maybe like it would be add open index or whatever. But we'll stick with set open indexes, and we'll have open indexes as an argument here. Or maybe we'll just say open index, then we'll have like a close index. Yeah, let's do that. We'll do add open index. Here we go. And we'll take an index here, and we'll say open. Well, here we're going to need to use the updater form here, so we'll get our state, and we'll return our state, or our open indexes. Going to need to be state.open indexes and the index. So we're just going to add that extra index right there. And then we'll have a remove open index, but we'll save that for your brain to think about it later. Okay, cool. So now we're going to need to update this set open index to add open index. And now instead of open index here, it's going to be open indexes. And we'll say open indexes includes index. Cool. And that should do it. Actually, if we pull up our browser now, we can open both. Now we need to add the closing, but hopefully you get the idea. Now we are capable of having multiple of these open, which was the new business requirement that comes up. So here's why our current tests are like where they don't save us, because the previous behavior actually still worked, or it still works. And in fact, you know what? Let's make this a real refactor where the people have to opt in to being able to do multiple indexes, and we'll just say that by default it's only one index at a time. So if that's the case, then we'll say if this.props.multiple, then we'll return this. This will be more of a true refactor. Otherwise, we'll do what we did before, where we return open indexes is index. There we go. That's more of a true refactor. And so now if I look here, I'm not opting into that, so I'm getting both of those open. If I go to index.js though, and I say, okay, well, we want this to be multiple, then now we're supporting both use cases, right? And then of course we need to add the close. But I think you're all smart. You can figure out how that would work. So here's where things get really hairy. Even though what we've done is actually a refactor, maybe we added a new feature, but the existing functionality, like anybody who is using the previous code, the way that as it was, we made it backward compatible. So they shouldn't have to change anything at all. All of the developers who are using our API before, and all of the users who are using that UI before, they shouldn't have to change anything. But our tests are totally broken. And that's the false negative when we're refactoring. That's like problem number one with testing implementation details. So the reason that's happening is because we're grabbing the wrapper, we're getting the state for this particular React component, and we're first off, we renamed the state. So literally there's only one bit of code in the entire code base that cares what that property is called, and it's this code right here. And so when we run into something like that, you're like, well, okay, why, this test now kind of only exists for itself. The only reason I wrote this test was so that the test could exist. It's not giving me any confidence that the user is having a good experience using this thing. And so I like to call this the test user, and I actually recently just blogged about this. If I can find another tab. Looks like I don't have another. Oh, wait, there it is. It's got tabs all over the place. Yeah, so if you go to my blog, kensydodds.com/blog, avoid the test user. That's what this is. This blog is talking about. Is the only code in the entire code base that cares about this particular, I guess, feature sort of this component is the test. And if that's the case, then it's worthless. Totally avoid that. Well, it's not entirely worthless, but in this particular instance, it is pretty worthless. So anyway, to fix this, we have to say, okay, now it's open indexes, and that's going to be this, and now we have to do to equal, okay, and then we add open index 1, and then now this is going to be index, oh, that needs to be an S, and that's going to be indexes to equal 0 and 1, okay. And I think I spelled something wrong or something. Oh, no, right. We are not multiple. There we go. Cool. Okay, so we were able to fix it. That's not a huge deal, but the problem is, and this is something that I see on a lot of teams, is they say, well, I really hate testing because anytime I touch any code, I have to change the implementation, and I don't like that. Or I have to go and change the test. And so, I don't understand how this test is really giving me any value. And so finding a way to avoid testing the internals of how this component works is really valuable because it allows us to make these changes without suffering those consequences. So that is false negatives when refactoring. Let's talk about the false positives when we're in the process of making changes or backward incompatible changes or introducing bugs. So I backed up everything here and we're going to introduce a bug, but our tests are not going to save us. That's what this is all about. So let's say that I'm a new developer and I'm coming in and I say, oh, that's interesting. I don't know why this needs to be there. That's kind of weird. Oh, actually, hold on. Yeah, we'll just do that. That makes a lot more sense. We'll just pass that on click handler function and then it'll get called and it should work, right? And so they just notice this, they make this change, they push it along, and because the test passed, they don't think to try it in the browser because the test should be giving us confidence that everything's working. But it's totally not working. If you actually did try this in the browser, then it's not going to do anything useful for you. It totally breaks the user expectation. But our tests, we're not verifying the user's expectation. Our tests, we're doing something totally different. And so because of that, our tests weren't giving us the value that they're supposed to. And so that's a false positive where the tests say everything's good. And you have 100% code coverage on this stuff too. So you feel like you're solid on this component. You can't break it. But actually you can, and it's actually really easy to do so. So that's the second half of testing implementation details and why that leads to problems. So for the last bit of my talk, I just want to show you what a test that doesn't test implementation details would look like, and I'll show you what React testing library would look like in testing this. So I restored it all back to the original, and then we can try and break it with the refactoring and stuff that we did before. So we're starting from a clean slate. I'm going to import React because we love React, and we're going to import. Actually, you know what? I just realized. Here, let's see, dependencies, testing library React. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to import React, sorry, render from testing library React. Okay, and here, let's just pop this one open. And I think I might actually have to refresh because Code Sandbox sometimes has trouble with stuff like this. So we'll just do that really quick. Okay. So testing, or RTL, there we go. Okay, so we've got that, and now we need to get our accordion, so we'll import the accordion from accordion. And now our test, I'm actually going to, like when you're testing free of implementation details, you think about your test in a very different way. Before we were thinking about, okay, when I call this method, it updates this state, and when I render this thing, it's going to render this other thing. The user doesn't care about any of those things. In fact, the user doesn't even care about the fact that you're using React at all. All the user cares about is that they can click on this thing and it opens up the contents of that that accordion. That's all that matters. And you actually have two users. You have the developer, the end user that we're talking about, but also the developer user who expects that they should be able to render an accordion with some given items, and then those items should be rendered, and then from there the user should be able to interact with it. So you've got those two users that actually matter to you, and then you have the test user that doesn't matter, and you want to stay away from the test user. So for this one, all I'm going to say is that it can open accordion item to see the contents. And for this, I'm going to render an accordion with items. And let's see, we had our, let's just grab those actually. So I've got my accordion, and I'm going to use the render from React Testing Library. So render that, and that's going to give me back some utilities that I can use. So not a wrapper. Please don't call this wrapper. If you're using React Testing Library, just don't call this wrapper. That is cruft from Enzyme that we don't need to carry along with us to React Testing Library. If you must call it something, call it utils, but I normally actually just destructure the utilities that I need. So from here, React Testing Library gives us a bunch of ways that we can traverse and interact with the things that have been rendered. And if I was testing this manually as a user, the way that I would know which one of these accordion items to click on so I could see the contents is I would look for a button that has the text favorite hats, and I would look for a button that has the text favorite footwear. So like here I am, I'm a user, I want to expand favorite footwear, I click on that one. I don't look for the second button, I don't look for the first button and click on that. I look for the button with that label. And so as a manual tester, that's how I would do this, and so our test should actually resemble that as closely as possible. And so with that, I'm going to say get by text. This is one of the utilities that React Testing Library exposes to let you traverse your rendered output. Another thing that it actually gives you is debug, so let's just do that really quick. We call debug, and we're going to get this monstrosity in our console, but it actually is highlighted HTML in your terminal locally. I maybe should have had this locally, but it all looks awesome, and it's just the full HTML that's all syntax highlighted and everything. So that's really helpful, especially when you're just getting going with this stuff. But for me, I know what I'm looking for. I want to get the favorite footwear button so I can go click on it, right? So I'm going to say footwear button equals get by text footwear.title. So I'm going to look for the element that has the text footwear.title. And if I can't find it, then I'm going to be like, hello, or like if it can't find it, then it's going to throw a big error and it'll tell you exactly, here's what the HTML looks like. I looked for text that had the text hello, but I couldn't find it. So something's up, you need to fix your query here. So with that, now that I have the footwear button, I need to click on it, and that's another utility that React Testing Library exposes is this fire event. So we'll say fire event.click on the footwear button. And now we can verify that the contents of the footwear are being displayed. So we can say get by text again, footwear.contents. And that would actually throw an error if it doesn't exist, but we can actually expect not to be null. That would be enough. If it didn't exist, then it would be null. And so now we actually have some legit like verification. Let's just make sure that this is actually working. You know, you want to make sure that you can break the thing. So if I say blah right here, then this test should actually break. So cool. It does break. That's good. So we are testing what we think we're testing. And on top of that, we can break both of these things by breaking that method as well. But our test has no idea how this is implemented. And here in a second, I'm going to rewrite this, refactor it to React hooks, and it's all going to work still, and it's amazing. Sorry for the spoiler. I think that's pretty much it. So like we could take this a little bit further, and we could also get the hats button, get by text hats.title, and then we could fire an event. Here we'll just do that on the hats button, and we could expect this hats.content not to be null. And so now we've clicked on both of them, and we've gotten like the full user experience, and we could verify too that they're not both being rendered by using our query by text, which actually will return null if it can't find what it's looking for, whereas get by text is going to throw an error. And so here I could say, shoot. Can you all hear me still? My computer froze, so if you can hear me,
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Dang it. So I got to reboot. This is why I was trying to do something else and it didn't work out. So I got to reboot. While I'm rebooting, feel free to call Tim Cook and tell him that his computers are the worst. And I'll be right back. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah, just let me set you up on this end, Kent. One sec.
Let me
Yeah, I
just
think
get this going again.
once you screen share, we should be okay.
Sorry, I can't hear you if you're talking. Sorry, go ahead again.
Once you screen share, we should be good.
Okay, cool. We rocking? Okay. So sorry. That I wish I could say that's the first time that's happened, but it's not. That's why I have a streaming PC, but then I couldn't share my screen with this Blue Jeans thing, so sorry about that. Okay, let me just wrap up. We're almost finished. So, yeah, where I left off was, oh, snap, it didn't save. Well, that's annoying. Here, I actually, this is why we have it saved, so I can solve that problem in a jiffy. Ta-da! Like magic. Um, okay, we don't have to be in the document, but we'll just say to not to be null. To be in the document is a really cool thing from just DOM that actually we can get that really quick. We'll just write here import just DOM extend expect, and now we've got to be in the document. A whole bunch of other really cool assertions. Okay, cool. So here before we have the hats content in the DOM and the footwear not in the DOM. We click on it and now it's the opposite scenario. So we're in good shape. So the last thing that I wanted to do here really quick, or two things really quick, is I wanted to do that refactor again, where we add the open indexes feature, and then also do that breaking change. So I'll do the breaking change first because that'll be probably quicker. If I go to the accordion and then I break this, then my enzyme test is still passing, but my React testing library test is broken because React testing library, it doesn't care about like any of the implementation. All it cares about is that when I click on this thing, this stuff shows up. That's what the user cares about, and so that's what our tests enable us to, how our tests enable us to write that. And the cool, like, it's not just, well, okay, don't write your enzyme test this way. It's React testing library doesn't really allow you to write it the wrong way, and so you're just better off using the tool that makes it hard to do the wrong thing. Okay, so that's that. And then for our open indexes, we'll say that and set open index. We'll just do this is open index. So now we, oh, and this is includes index. There we go. So that was a refactor. Everything is working as it had before. React testing library is still working. So one last refactor that I'm going to do here really quick is we're going to rewrite this to hooks, and it's still going to work, and it's going to be awesome. So we'll make a function called accordion, and that's going to take some props, just items. And then we're going to have some state. So we'll have our open indexes, and well, here we'll just do open index. It doesn't really matter. Set open index, React use state. We initialize that to 0. And then we'll have our, well, we have our set open index thing, so we can get rid of both of those. I love hooks. It's so awesome. Then we'll move our render, or what we're rendering, up into the bottom of that. Get rid of this thing. And then look for all the places where we see this and just blow that away. Get rid of that props there. This open indexes we'll just change to index is the open index. And oh, I've got an old version of React here. Let's fix that really quick. Dependency React. There we go. And we'll want React DOM. There we go. Okay, and with that, maybe it'll rerun and maybe it'll work. Yeah, it doesn't. Let's refresh. I saved everything though, so that refresh should work. Ta-da! In our accordion, we didn't have to change any of the tests. We rewrote the whole thing using hooks And React testing library is like, yeah, that's cool, I don't care. But Enzyme is like, oh wait, I can't get state on a function component because they don't have instances, so sorry. Um, so like my biggest takeaway from all of this is avoid writing your tests that like inspect the implementation of the thing that you're testing. And this applies to more than just your React components. It applies to anything that you're writing. The most harmful test that you can write is one that tests implementation details. And so focusing, like taking a step back and thinking, how would the user test this if the user were testing, like manually testing this, and try to make your test look like that. That should be your goal as a test author. The user's going to click on this button, they're going to verify that the thing is in there. Maybe they'll even click on the other button back and toggle it back and forth or something. That's how your test should look, and that's what React Testing Library lets you do. And yeah, if you really want to get deeper into some of this stuff, then I'll just plug this really quick. Testingjavascript.com, where this is like the Mercedes-Benz of workshops on testing on the internet. It is so much stuff about testing, and so if you really want to level up your craft on testing your JavaScript stuff, and specifically your front end, your UI, then this is the place you want to go. And with that, that's pretty much all I've got for you. So thanks for dealing with all of my technical problems, and I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to answer questions, but I probably went over time, so I understand if you've got to move on to the next speaker. So sorry about that.
Yeah, if you have a couple more minutes, we'd love to ask you a few questions,
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
and I will relay them for the audience. So who's going to go first? All right, guy in the red there.
I'm sorry, I can't hear it all.
Yeah, I know it's tough, so I'll repeat it once he's
Oh,
finished his
okay.
question. Yeah.
Okay.
So the question is, is this using the browser to perform the test? And if not, what happens when you use something like window that would only exist in the browser?
Yeah, so this all like Enzyme and React Testing Library both rely on the browser. And so like it doesn't have to be in a browser necessarily. It can be in a Node environment with JS DOM. Um, and so yeah, like Windows is available with JS DOM. If you're using Jest, then that comes like pre-packaged. Create React App is like that's the default. It includes all the JS DOM APIs. So like 90% of the people using React Testing Library and Enzyme, maybe even more, and people who are writing tests are actually running their tests in Node using JS DOM to simulate the browser.
All right, so next. Yep.
Yeah.
So what's the largest app that you know of that uses React Testing Library?
Facebook.com, maybe. Um,
Never heard of it. Is
yeah.
this a new thing?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are um, like users on the documentation page. So of course I worked at PayPal for a while. We're using it there. A bunch of others. Wix.com is using it. There are way more people using React Testing Library. Um, yeah, but I do know that Facebook teams are using it, not just Facebook open source, but Facebook teams. And in addition to that, the React team officially endorses React Testing Library as the testing solution for products, which is kind of cool, actually. But
Yeah, that's awesome. And thanks for giving my joke an actual answer. So,
yeah.
Mike? Okay, so far Mike's question is 5 minutes long, and I'm gonna try to paraphrase it as best I can. So first off, Mike loves React Testing Library, and then everything after the but is what you're supposed to pay attention to. So that was the next part of it. So Mike actually works for the Canadian government in a really cool position, and because it's the Canadian government, we have to support everything in French and English. The text of the web pages changes a lot. And he runs into some problems with the get by text that because things change so frequently.
Yeah, so are the changes happening because like you're not in control of the content, it's the content folks are in control of the content? Like even the English version of the content?
Yeah, it's basically they don't really control the content.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. So like when I was at PayPal, of course PayPal is translated in like tons of languages. Like our locales directory is outrageous. But yeah, so and this is a super common question. So my recommendation is that you just you load all of your translations in your test. So like your test should render with the actual content, the English version of the content, or whatever language you choose, but just one version of the content. And you write your tests in that version of the content, relying on that version of the content. Now, if you don't control that content, then there are still some things that you can do. Like, for example, here we're actually not doing any contents at all because we're providing those contents. But like often that's not the case. Like you're gonna inline the content in places, and you want to select on that content. Like submit button, it's gonna be different in every language. And so what I'd recommend is that you make your query as loose as possible, so that if they change from a submit form to simply submit, that it doesn't actually break anything. So where you'd say get by text submit and ignore case, and that's going to get you whether your button says submit form or just submit. Now, if they change it to something like launch missiles or something, then I actually want my test to break in that case because I don't want my users thinking they're going to launch missiles, right? So lots of times the breaking changes that the content is going to create are actually things I want to know about because it actually changes user behavior, or maybe there was a typo that they had made or something. And so I'm not personally bothered by when the content, like the people in charge of content, change things that actually breaks my test. But if something is happening a lot and it's like that's just not working well for you, then another thing that my next recommendation is instead of loading all of your content in your test so that it's actually rendering the real content, you mock out your translation component or whatever it is that is doing the translations for you, so that instead of looking for looking up the translation, it just renders the key and maybe even some of the data, but probably just the key in place of that component rather than looking up the actual content. And then you can do your get by text, some page dot form dot submit button or whatever you're going to call that thing. So you look it up by so as far as React Testing Library is concerned, that is the content, but whatever it is that you're using to mock the content component or whatever, or the message component, I guess, you just have it render the translation ID, and then you look it up by the translation ID as if it's the content, and that works out pretty well. If that still doesn't work very well for you for some weird reason, then you can use the get by test ID, and get by test ID, you'll just say submit button, and then you put a data test ID submit button on your button as a prop. And like that's kind of a last resort thing, but that's why it exists, is as an escape hatch for situations where you just really can't get it by the content. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And all right, I know it's getting late for you too, so let's just do one more question and we'll let you get back to your evening. Anybody? Anybody? Oh, yeah. All right. You might have even heard that. What kind of challenges do you see when companies are switching over to React testing library?
Um, I think the biggest, so actually one of my favorite features of React Testing Library is also kind of a big challenge. And that is that well, we didn't really get to look at it here, but one of the queries that you have is get by label text. And get by label text will get you form elements by their label text. So instead of looking for the first input and typing in the username, which is not what the user does, you're going to get the form input by its label text. So it'll say, find me the one that's called username, and then I'll type my username in. And that's what the user does. Like they see a big long form, they're going to find the username field, and they'll type in their username into that one. So that's a really cool feature. But if your label is not wired up to your input with either an HTML4 or a ARIA labeled by or whatever, then React Testing Library is not going to be able to find the input that's associated to the label with that text. And so that's actually a really cool thing because it means that your code has to be accessible. Because if you don't associate a label to its input, then assistive technologies can't really help with people who need those assistive technologies. And so it's actually like technically that should be considered a bug. And depending on your company, you might get sued for that. So be careful. And so I see that as a feature of React Testing Library because it's really hard to test things that are not accessible or screen reader accessible. And so, yeah, it's kind of a two-edged sword because it's good because it encourages you to write accessible stuff. But where it becomes a real challenge is if you're using third-party modules that are not accessible, then it becomes pretty hard to test your components that are using those third-party modules. And so the solution is to make pull requests to those third-party modules to make them accessible. Or to mock out those third-party modules and just hope that they work. And that's actually not a bad solution either. But that probably has been one of the biggest challenges that I found people having in adopting this. Another challenge is changing the way that you think about writing tests. Because for such a long time, especially in React, we've been testing implementation details so much that switching over to a more user-focused approach of testing has been a little challenging. So great question.
All right, thank you so much, Kent.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm sorry again for the technical problems, but I'm glad that we got it mostly working. So
It's all good. Thanks again.
Great. Yeah, good night.